Okay. We are at King David. We're just moving right on through the Old Testament. And I hope you're getting a grasp that God's got a plan. And in our last lesson, we saw that David was ordained by Samuel to be king. Only problem is Saul was still king, so that kind of makes it difficult when you've been given a job to do, but there's somebody else in your way. But David was gracious about it. Matter of fact, he had 2 chances to kill Saul, but he wouldn't do it because Saul was still God's anointed king. And so he showed a lot of high ethics and morals there. But he was also an imperfect person, and we've seen already through the Bible that God works through imperfect people. If he didn't, he wouldn't be able to work through anybody. So we're going to pick up at the Goliath story. So if you want to turn in your Bible to 1 Samuel chapter 17. Every kid knows this story. But there's one little aspect of it you might not have known. Verse 25 of chapter 17 of 1 Samuel. Now the Israelites had been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming off? They're talking about Goliath here. He's walking around. For 40 days the 2 armies faced each other, and Goliath is trash talking in whatever trash talking was like back then. And he's saying, hey, you send your best man over, take me on. And so far nobody had done this. So the Israelites will say, see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. That right there would be enough to go take him on, wouldn't it? Not have to pay taxes. David asked the men standing near him, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine? And I got to say something. The worst thing in the world is to see yourself on video. And when I went through the video last week, I called the Philistines the Philippines. So, anyhow, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel?
We didn't hear it anyway.
Oh, okay. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? So David's brothers were all there. Come on by. David's brothers were there, and David took them some food. So basically to them, he was the pizza delivery boy, okay? He was just nothing. And they started harassing him, saying, you wicked thing, you just came here to watch the battle. Now here we are in the battle. Of course, they're all just standing there staring across the place at each other. So we pick up at verse 32. So David goes to Saul. David said to Saul, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go there and fight him. Saul replied, you are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like the one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. And there's some interesting Hebrew here. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. The word paw used there twice and hand are the same Hebrew word. But I guess it would look funny if the hand of the bear and the hand of the lion, so the translators use the word paw here. Saul said to David, "Go and the Lord be with you." So David had to try on Saul's armor and stuff, and it wouldn't fit. You know, he was, if you remember, he was a head taller than anybody else in Israel. And so he said, "This just doesn't feel right," so he took it off. Then we go to verse 39. David fastened his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. He took his staff in his hand. Look at this. Chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. Here's a question for the class. Why did David choose 5 stones? I wouldn't have known this answer either, but I heard it from, I think it was Chuck Missler or somebody like that. And I thought, wow, that's cool. Well, it could be all those things. Maybe he thought he'd miss and need another one. But here's what a guy brought up. He said, Goliath had 4 brothers. Isn't that the coup? That's why he picked 5 stones. Goliath had 4 brothers.
It's kind of like loading your gun.
Yeah. Here he is, by the way, an actual picture. Verse 48. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag, taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. First thing I think, a slingshot is the kind that's shaped like a Y, That's not what he has here. It's a sling. It's actually a slingshot, where you actually whirl it around and let it go.
They still use them in Israel.
Yeah, and I tell you what, I'm not sure I could hit that wall with one if I had to. But I think the kind you aim would be much better. I used to put ball bearings in mine. Boy, that thing was deadly. So anyhow, it was actually a slingshot. You slung it. So when the Philistines saw this, of course, they took off running. And the Israelites all of a sudden got courage and chased them and kind of cleaned them out a little bit. So Saul gave David this high rank in the army. Now imagine this. His brothers were kind of harassing him because he was the pizza delivery boy, basically. He was the DoorDash of Israel because he brought them some food. All of a sudden, he's their boss. He's high up in the army. And this is very unfortunate for David. The people sang this song, and Saul overheard it. Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Well, that brings on a little jealousy for kings when that kind of thing happens. So David was sitting there playing, and all of a sudden Saul took a spear and slung it at him. Luckily, he missed. And so David backed off a little bit. Then Saul decided, I'm going to send him in the battles and let the Philistines take care of him. Well, they never did because David kept winning. He kept winning. And so he decided he wanted to dead. He told his son Jonathan to have him killed, and Jonathan kind of calmed Saul down a little bit because Jonathan was good friends with David. And so David was back at the palace. This evil spirit came over Saul, and he threw another spear at him and missed him. Luckily, he was a bad shot. So then David left town, and a lot of 1 Samuel is about Saul chasing David. He'd go to this town, and Saul would hear, oh, he's in this town. And so, but by the time he got there, David was gone. And so there was a lot of chasing around. So one time David and his men were hiding way back in a cave, and Saul came in there by himself, and the King James puts it this way, that he covered his feet. Now what that really means in English is he went potty. And David, while he was there, cut off a little piece of his tunic there, just a small piece of cloth, just to show him, I could have killed you. And so Saul went outside, and David came back out and said, hey, Saul, look at here. And so Saul kind of backed off a little while, and then he came back after him again, and he never really let him rest. He kept coming after him. And finally, Saul was battling the Philistines, and he was injured in a bad way. So, here's him throwing the spear. So look at chapter 31 of 1 Samuel. Verse 4. Saul said to his armor bearer, draw your sword and run me through, or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me. I guess he knew he'd be tortured if the bad guys got to him. But his armor bearer was terrified and would not do it. Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When the armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor bearer and all his men died together on that same day. Now flip over to 2 Samuel chapter 5. Verse 1. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, we are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns, and the Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people, Israel, and you will become their ruler. When all the elders in Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord. They anointed David king over Israel. So David's finally king. He's finally King David. And here's a little picture of him being sworn in as king. But this takes us back to Genesis 49. If you recall, Jacob was laying on his deathbed, and he was blessing all of his sons. He had the 12 sons of the 12 tribes. And he said to Judah, he said, the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until he whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. So the kingly line is coming through the line of Judah, and David just happens to be the first king from the line of Judah. If you remember, Saul, I think was from Benjamin, yeah. And so we start this long line of kings, and the final king, it's going to be interrupted by some things like captivity, things like that. But that lineage is going to keep going, and that's what we're going to follow. And the final king, of course, is Christ, who is also from the tribe of Judah. So with that, I got time for some Q&A or comments or more birthday cake or whatever. But I knew I just had a short lesson today because I knew we'd be having festivities. Any questions about Saul and David or any of the other stuff we looked at over the past few months? I'm really hoping that you have a really good picture of the New of the Old Testament when we finish here. This is lesson 13, part 1. Next week we'll have more about King David, part 2. And there's a total of 20 lessons in here. So we're getting close. We'll have a little captivity going on here, and a splitting of the kingdom. And I already know that some folks had to leave early. They're not mad. So we're going to see David, and then we're going to talk about Solomon in another week. And then we have a splitting of the kingdom. And the kingdom splits up, northern kingdom and southern kingdom. So that will give you a real good picture of the Old Testament. We'll be into Kings a little bit, maybe some Chronicles. I can't remember. So anything? Anybody have anything, or y'all just ready to go home? Or grab a piece of cake.
If there's nothing up there, the questions about the lesson, I wanted you to say something about, you and I talked about some things that you had heard about, rumors of the temple being rebuilt and so forth.
Oh yeah,
Referring back
yeah.
to Revelation.
If you've been watching Andy Woods, he was showing some things in Jerusalem that they're really wanting to build that third temple. Well, that's going to really head us toward some of the things happening in Revelation. As a matter of fact, that temple's got to be built because the Antichrist comes and sets up an abomination that causes desolation, which is an object. It's not a person. The abomination that causes desolation is some kind of object that defiles the temple. So,
how they want to rebuild the temple. I mean, I don't know why it just hit me. To sacrifice again. I never thought about that, but they haven't sacrificed since the temple was destroyed.
Yeah.
And they want it back where they can do that again.
Yeah, see, this would be the third temple. You've heard of the second temple time, the time of the second temple? Well, that goes from about 500 BC to 70 AD. So that's the second temple period, it's called. So there'll be a third temple period coming on.
They sacrificed a certain heifer, and they thought it had gone extinct, but they found in South Alabama there's a man who had them, and Israel's paying him to keep them breeding, and so because they believing they're going to go back and sacrifice.
Yeah. I'm sure all the sheep were overjoyed hearing about this. Can you imagine the thousands of animals that got?
Oh, that job would have been horrible.
Yeah. The keeper of the barbecue pit basically is what that altar was.
All the time going.
Well, that's a picture of 1 John 1:9. He talked about this morning. There's a verse in there. It's 1 John 1:7. It talks about being in fellowship with each other and communion with God. And he said that the blood of Jesus will continuously cleanse you forever. If you go to the Greek and look up the word.
Yeah.
It's like the blood's still flowing.
And Hebrews said he did it once and for all. He's our high priest. All right, anything else?
Well, is anything said about what was happening between 70 AD and 1948? That's a long period of time that the Jews were without a temple, without land, and without anything else. But what is said about that period? What do we know about it?
I don't know, just whatever history had. I know that in about 130 something, the Jews actually got kicked out of Jerusalem.
Mhm.
Rome just got fed up with them and kicked them plumb out of Jerusalem. You can't even live in here. And
They were scattered all
yeah,
over the world.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And persecuted.
It is.
yeah.